What if everything you thought you knew about history was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle? Imagine holding a map drawn more than 500 years ago, a map that shouldn't exist. A map that shows a continent buried under miles of ice for thousands of years, drawn with impossible precision, long before modern technology could even dream of such detail. This isn't science fiction. This is the Piri Reis map of 1513, and it's just one of 21 maps from Antiquity that defy explanation. These aren't mere curiosities. They are silent witnesses to a forgotten past, suggesting that ancient civilizations may have possessed knowledge or connections far beyond what historians have ever dared to imagine. From the icy coasts of Antarctica charted centuries before its official discovery to the startlingly accurate outlines of continents that should have been entirely unknown, these maps raise profound and unsettling questions. How did cartographers from eras without satellites, without aerial photography, without even reliable chronometers, manage to capture the world with such breathtaking accuracy? Were they working from lost sources, maps, and records that have since vanished from history? Could these artifacts be evidence of advanced seafaring cultures, global exploration, or even contact between civilizations separated by oceans and millennia? Mainstream archaeology often struggles to account for these anomalies, but the maps themselves remain, waiting patiently for us to decode their secrets. In this video, we're setting out on a journey through 21 of the most mysterious maps ever created, each one a masterpiece of art, science, and mystery. We'll explore the stories behind their creation, the minds that drew them, and the jaw-dropping details that continue to baffle experts today. You'll see how these documents challenge not only our timeline of human achievement, but also our understanding of exploration, technology, and memory itself. So settle in and open your mind to the possibility that history, as we know it, is incomplete, and that these maps from antiquity may hold the keys to worlds we are only beginning to remember. To understand why these maps are so astonishing, we first have to step back into the minds of the ancient world and see how they viewed the land and sea around them. Picture a Babylonian scholar in the 6th century before the Common Era, kneeling over a clay tablet, etching not just a map of his empire but a diagram of the entire cosmos as he understood it. For these early civilizations, cartography was a profound blend of observed reality, celestial navigation, and deep mythology. They charted the known world by the stars overhead, by the stories passed down from sailors and traders, and by a philosophical desire to place their homeland at the center of a vast, often terrifying, unknown. Their tools were rudimentary: no sextants, no telescopes, no way to accurately measure longitude. They relied on the accounts of travelers, which were often embellished with tales of monsters and mythical lands beyond the horizon. This was the very foundation of mapmaking, a courageous attempt to impose order on chaos using the limited information available. Historians like Herodotus, often called the father of history, provide us with a fascinating window into this process. In his writings, he meticulously documented the geographical knowledge of his time in the 5th century B.C.E., describing the shape of the world as a disk surrounded by a great ocean river. He collected stories from Persian officials and Egyptian priests, weaving together fact and fable. His descriptions of the Nile's annual floods or the customs of Scythian nomads were groundbreaking. Yet he also reported on giant gold-digging ants in India and Hyperborean races living beyond the north wind. His contemporary, Strabo, writing centuries later, aimed for a more scientific approach in his 17-volume Geographia, compiling everything known about the world for the Roman Empire. He argued for a spherical Earth and tried to synthesize the reports of explorers like Pytheas, who may have reached the Arctic Circle. Yet, even Strabo's work was a patchwork of hard-won facts, educated guesses, and outright legends, constrained by the immense practical difficulties of travel and communication. This context is what makes the anomalous maps we'll explore so utterly baffling. Given these immense limitations, the lack of precise instruments, the reliance on oral tradition, the blending of myth with reality, the maps produced should reflect the fuzzy, incomplete understanding of their era. And most of them do. Consider the medieval Mappa Mundi, like the famous Hereford map from around 1300. These were not navigational tools but spiritual diagrams, placing Jerusalem at the center of a circular world filled with biblical scenes, mythical beasts, and the Garden of Eden on the outskirts. They were symbolic representations of faith, not accurate depictions of geography. This is the expected trajectory of cartography, a slow, gradual evolution from symbolic and religious worldviews toward more scientific, empirical methods over centuries. So when we encounter a map like the one from Piri Reis in 1513, which we just introduced, it creates a staggering cognitive dissonance. It doesn't fit the pattern. It emerges from a world still steeped in superstition and limited technology, yet it displays a level of precision that seems to leapfrog centuries of progress. How could a map from the early 16th century possibly depict the coastline of Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered for another 300 years? If the standard tools of the time were the compass, the astrolabe, and the accounts of often lost sailors, what unknown set of tools or sources could possibly account for such impossible knowledge? This is the central, thrilling mystery that pulls us forward. The gap between what these ancient cartographers should have been capable of and what they actually produced is a chasm that challenges the very foundations of our historical narrative, forcing us to ask if a great deal of advanced geographical knowledge was once possessed by cultures whose records have been utterly lost to time. And so we come to the map that stands as the crown jewel of cartographic mysteries, the one that ignited the modern fascination with these ancient puzzles. It was the year 1929, and within the dusty, hallowed halls of Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, a team of historians was undertaking a routine cataloging of the old imperial library. Tucked away amidst a stack of forgotten manuscripts and scrolls, they unearthed a truly breathtaking artifact, a beautifully detailed world map painted on gazelle skin parchment, dated to the year 1513. This was the work of an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, and it was about to send shockwaves through the world of history and archaeology. The map itself was a fragment, just a portion of a larger whole, but what it showed was nothing short of miraculous. It depicted the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and most astonishingly, the northern coastline of a landmass that looked suspiciously like Antarctica. This is the detail that defies all logic. The continent of Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, a full 3 centuries after this map was drawn. Even more perplexing is the fact that the coastline depicted is not the icy, glacier-bound outline we see today, but rather the actual topography of the land beneath the ice, a topography that has been hidden from human eyes for millennia, since at least 4000 BCE, only being fully mapped in the 1940s using modern seismic survey technology. How could a 16th century Ottoman admiral have possibly known what the land of Antarctica looked like before it was entombed in ice? Piri Reis himself provided a fascinating clue. In the extensive notes scribbled on the map, he openly states that this work was not the product of original exploration, but was instead a compilation, a synthesis of about 20 older source maps, some of which he claimed dated back to the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE. He even references consulting what he called the maps of the infidels, potentially lost charts from European, Arabic, or even pre-Columbian sources that have since vanished from history. This claim of ancient sources catapulted the map into a fierce and ongoing debate. In the 1950s and 60s, a professor named Charles Hapgood became the map's most famous champion. After extensive study, he and his team, which even included a young student named Michael Cremo, concluded that the Piri Reis map was genuinely depicting the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. Hapgood argued in his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings that this level of accuracy required a knowledge of spherical trigonometry and precise longitude calculations that were far beyond the capabilities of any known civilization until the 18th century. His radical conclusion was that the map must be based on documents copied and recopied over centuries, originating from a highly advanced prehistoric maritime civilization that had mapped the entire globe before much of this knowledge was lost to some cataclysm. Unsurprisingly, skeptics have offered alternative explanations. Some suggest the controversial landmass isn't Antarctica at all, but a distorted, guessed representation of the southern tip of South America, perhaps conflated with rumors of a great southern continent. Others attribute the accuracy to pure luck, a fortunate coincidence of ink on parchment. They point out that the map does contain its share of errors and fantastical elements, as was common for the period. However, the counter-argument remains compelling. The shape and scale of this southern continent align far too well with the actual subglacial coast to be easily dismissed as mere chance. The map's treatment of longitude is another critical point. Determining longitude accurately was the single greatest problem for navigators and cartographers until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. Yet, the relative positions of Africa and South America on the Piri Reis map are rendered with a precision that suggests the original mapmakers had solved this complex puzzle thousands of years earlier. The very existence of this map forces us to confront a staggering possibility. Could it be a surviving fragment, a faded photocopy of a much older world survey conducted by a culture whose name we don't even know? A culture with seafaring capabilities that rivaled the great age of exploration, able to chart continents we thought were undiscovered. The idea that a global civilization, or a network of interconnected civilizations, predates our accepted historical timeline is a controversial one, but the Piri Reis map stands as one of its most tangible and enduring pieces of evidence. It is a ghost from a forgotten age, a silent witness to knowledge that should not exist, challenging us to rewrite the story of human exploration and reminding us that history is often far stranger and far more mysterious than we ever imagined. Just a few short years after Piri Reis put ink to parchment, another map emerged from the heart of the European Renaissance that presents a mystery every bit as profound. In 1531, the brilliant French mathematician and cartographer Oronce Finé unveiled his masterpiece, a world map of such elegance and shocking accuracy that it continues to divide scholarly opinion to this day. Finé was no ordinary chartmaker. He was a true Renaissance polymath, a professor of mathematics at the Collège de France who moved effortlessly between the worlds of astronomy, medicine, and art. His map, known as the Nova et Integra Universi Orbis Descriptio, or a new and complete description of the whole world, is a stunning work of artistry, engraved in a single, elegant heart-shaped projection known as a cordiform. This shape itself was a revolutionary choice, an attempt to portray the spherical curvature of the Earth on a flat surface with a mathematical sophistication that was decades ahead of its time. But the map's true enigma lies not in its beautiful form, but in its confounding content. At the very bottom of this intricate heart-shaped world, Finé drew a vast, unmistakable landmass. He labeled it Terra Australis, the southern land, and he depicted it not as a fragmented, hypothetical coastline, but as a single, coherent continent. Its northern shore is rendered with an astonishing level of detail, showing deep indentations, peninsulas, and what appear to be massive river systems flowing into the sea. This is, for all intents and purposes, a recognizable depiction of Antarctica. The problem, of course, is that this was drawn nearly 300 years before the Russian expedition of Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen and Mikhail Lazarev would first sight the Antarctic mainland in 1820. Even more baffling, the continent is shown largely free of ice, with features that suggest a knowledge of its actual topography. How could Finé have possibly conceived of this? His own writings and notes are frustratingly silent on his sources for this part of the world. Some historians argue that Finé was simply following a popular theoretical concept of the era. Since the time of the ancient Greeks, geographers like Ptolemy had postulated that a great southern continent must exist to balance out the landmasses of the northern hemisphere, an idea known as the antipodes or Terra Australis incognita. Most maps of the period, however, portrayed this theoretical land as a vague, amorphous blob, a placeholder for the unknown. Finé's depiction is radically different. It is precise, confident, and geographically coherent. It shows a land that looks like it was charted, not guessed at. Modern researchers who have compared his outline to subglacial surveys of Antarctica note startling correlations, particularly in the region now known as Queen Maud Land. The sinuous curves and bays on his map seem to align with actual underwater features and glacial valleys, details that would be impossible to intuit through pure speculation. This level of accuracy forces us to consider a far more intriguing possibility than mere educated guesswork. Could Oronce Finé, this brilliant scholar in Paris, have had access to the same kind of lost source materials that Piri Reis referenced? Perhaps he studied ancient charts held in the vaults of the Vatican Library, or consulted with Portuguese sailors whose secret discoveries were never officially recorded. His use of the cordiform projection, a complex mathematical feat, suggests he was working with sophisticated geographical data that required a more advanced framework to display properly. The map is a paradox, a work of undeniable genius that also contains elements of knowledge that simply should not have been available to any European in 1531. It stands in stark opposition to its contemporaries, which were still filling the southern oceans with mythical kingdoms, sea monsters, and the golden city of El Dorado. Finé's map feels like a window into a different reality, one where the secrets of the globe were already known. This leaves us with a haunting question. Was Oronce Finé one of the last recipients of a dying tradition? A Renaissance man who, by virtue of his intellect and position, was able to glimpse fragments of a much older, far more accurate geographical understanding that was rapidly being lost beneath the new discoveries of his own age. His map is a beautiful, perplexing artifact that hints at a deep and forgotten pipeline of knowledge flowing from antiquity to the Renaissance. It suggests that the true history of exploration is not a straight line of progress, but perhaps a cycle of discovery, loss, and rediscovery. And as we will see, this theme of inexplicable precision only deepens with our next map, which comes not from a French academic, but from the heart of the Ottoman Empire's naval intelligence. Just a few decades after Oronce Finé's mysterious heart-shaped chart, another cartographic masterpiece emerged from a vastly different cultural center, bearing secrets just as profound. In 1559, an Ottoman cartographer named Hadji Ahmed produced a stunning world map that seems to defy not only the geographical knowledge of his time, but also the very technological capabilities of his era. Created at the absolute zenith of Ottoman naval power under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, this map reflects an empire with its eyes firmly set on global dominance, its fleets commanding the Mediterranean and its traders venturing into the Indian Ocean. Yet, for all its political might, the Ottoman Empire was not known for dispatching great expeditions into the uncharted waters of the far northern Pacific. This is what makes the Hadji Ahmed map so deeply puzzling. It doesn't just vaguely sketch the New World, it presents the western coastline of North America, from modern-day California all the way up to Alaska, with a breathtaking and wholly inexplicable accuracy. The detail that truly stuns historians is the map's treatment of the narrow body of water separating Alaska from Siberia. Hadji Ahmed depicts this passage, the Bering Strait, with a clarity that is nothing short of miraculous. This crucial geographic junction would not be officially explored and charted for another 2 centuries, when the Danish explorer Vitus Bering sailed through it in 1728, ultimately giving it his name. So how did a Turkish cartographer in the mid-16th century know to draw this narrow channel, this precise point of connection between 2 continents that were, according to all conventional history, completely unknown to each other at the time? The map doesn't show it as a guessed theoretical land bridge. It shows it as a navigable strait, a fact that wouldn't be confirmed by European powers for generations. The mysteries only deepen when you examine the techniques used to create it. Historians and cartographic analysts who have studied the map's construction note that it employs principles of spherical trigonometry to project the curved surface of the Earth onto a flat plane. This is a highly advanced mathematical concept, one that was certainly understood in academic circles, but was almost never applied with such practical precision in mapmaking of this period, especially for regions that were supposed to be entirely unexplored. It's as if someone provided Hadji Ahmed with a set of precise coordinates, latitudes and longitudes, for coastlines that no European or Ottoman sailor was supposed to have ever visited. The map's portrayal of Alaska and the Siberian coastline isn't just roughly correct. It's populated with specific, identifiable peninsulas, bays, and mountain ranges that align with reality in a way that eliminates the possibility of a lucky guess. This level of detail has led to fascinating, albeit speculative, theories about its origins. One compelling idea is that Hadji Ahmed was not working from original Ottoman sources, but was instead copying or compiling information from much older, now lost maps. Could these sources have come from pre-Columbian Islamic explorers? There are tantalizing, though unproven, accounts of Muslim travelers from the Middle East or West Africa crossing the Atlantic long before Columbus. Another theory points east, suggesting the information may have flowed along the Silk Road from Chinese sources. The great Ming Dynasty Admiral Zheng, he had commanded a massive fleet that explored the Indian Ocean and possibly beyond in the early 15th century, and some researchers speculate that knowledge from Chinese voyages, which were far more advanced than those of contemporary Europe, may have trickled westward into the Islamic world and eventually into the hands of Ottoman scholars like Hadji Ahmed. The map, therefore, becomes more than just a curious artifact. It becomes a silent testament to a potential web of forgotten exploration. It forces us to confront the possibility that the globe was far more interconnected in antiquity than our history books allow, that voyages of discovery were undertaken by cultures we rarely credit, and that their monumental achievements were later lost to war, decay, or simply the passage of time. The Hadji Ahmed map exists without a paper trail, no ship logs, no official reports, no chronicles of the daring journeys that would have been necessary to gather such information. It stands alone, a beautiful and precise ghost from the past, asking us to consider how many other chapters of human adventure have been completely erased from our collective memory, leaving behind only these cryptic clues on a handful of miraculous maps. Now we travel even further back in time, to an era shrouded in the fog of the late Middle Ages, and encounter a map wrapped in a tale of adventure, family pride, and one of cartography's most enduring whodunits. The story begins in the late 14th century with two wealthy Venetian brothers, Niccolo and Antonio Zeno. According to family accounts published much later, the Zeno brothers were daring navigators who sailed into the treacherous North Atlantic, far beyond the known waters of Europe. They allegedly reached the shores of Greenland and even a land they called Estertilland, interacting with the local Norse settlers and bringing back incredible stories and crude charts of these distant, icy realms. Decades later, in 1558, a descendant named Niccolo Zeno the Younger, claiming to have discovered the old letters and maps in his family's attic, published a book that included a now famous map of the North Atlantic. This map, known as the Zeno Map, is the source of a controversy that has raged for centuries. On its face, the Zeno Map is a fascinating document. It shows a dramatically reshaped North Atlantic, with Greenland depicted with a surprising and somewhat accurate proportion, and a large, mysterious island placed between Iceland and Greenland that the brothers labeled Friesland. This island, described in great detail with its own settlements and topography, is the heart of the mystery. It appears on no modern map because, simply put, it doesn't exist. For many scholars, this is the clearest evidence that the entire Zeno narrative is an elaborate Renaissance hoax, a clever forgery perpetrated by Niccolo the Younger to bring glory to his family name and perhaps to capitalize on the intense public fascination with New World exploration. They point to stylistic elements of the map that seem more consistent with 16th century Italian cartography than with any supposed 14th century original. Yet, other researchers argue there's more to the story than simple fabrication. They note that while Friesland itself is fictional, its placement and the detailed rendering of Greenland's southern fjords are suspiciously accurate for a pure invention. The shape of Greenland on the Zeno map, though distorted, is far more recognizable than on other maps of the period, suggesting it might be based on genuine, first-hand Norse sailing charts that the original brothers could have obtained during their travels. Some maritime historians have proposed a fascinating theory that Friesland was not a complete invention, but a misplacement or a conflation of actual geographic features. They suggest it could be a distorted representation of the Faroe Islands, or even a now submerged section of the Greenland shelf that was above water during a colder climatic period, a ghost of a real land remembered in Norse sagas and mistakenly immortalized as a major island by the Zenos. The map's influence is undeniable regardless of its authenticity. It was taken as gospel by many of the great explorers of the age. The English navigator Martin Frobisher carried a copy on his voyages in search of the Northwest Passage, and he even believed he had discovered and claimed the non-existent Friesland during his expedition in 1576, naming one of his landing sites Frobisher's Friesland. More importantly, the renowned explorer John Cabot is known to have studied the Zeno map intently before his own landmark voyage to Newfoundland in 1497. He was likely convinced by its depiction of a vast, reachable landmass across the Atlantic, and while he didn't find Friesland, he did find something far greater, the continental coastline of North America. In this way, the Zeno map, whether a conscious fraud or a misunderstood relic, actively shaped the course of exploration, proving that even a map's errors can have monumental consequences. This leaves us with a deeply intriguing puzzle. If the map is a forgery, it is a work of genius woven together with just enough tantalizing accuracy to be believable to contemporary explorers. But if it is based on a genuine, older source, however corrupted through translation and republication, what does that say about the knowledge possessed by late medieval sailors? Could the Zeno brothers have truly ventured to Greenland and spoken with Norse settlers whose own geographic understanding, passed down from the Viking age of Eric the Red, contained fragments of maps pointing even further west to the coasts of Canada? The Zeno map forces us to confront the messy, imperfect process by which knowledge is transmitted and corrupted across generations. It exists in a gray area between myth and measurement, reminding us that some of history's most compelling documents are those we cannot definitively prove or disprove, forever holding their secrets close. But to fully grasp the significance of these medieval and Renaissance mysteries, we must journey back to the very bedrock of Western cartography, to a man whose work cast a shadow over mapmaking for more than 1,000 years. In the 2nd century AD, in the vibrant intellectual hub of Alexandria, a Greek-Egyptian scholar named Claudius Ptolemy undertook a project of staggering ambition. His work, the Geographia, was not just a single map but a multi-volume masterpiece containing detailed instructions for mapmaking, a catalogue of over 8,000 places with their supposed latitudes and longitudes, and a worldview that would become dogma for centuries to come. Ptolemy's goal was nothing less than to map the entire known world using a system of mathematical precision, and in doing so, he created a framework so advanced that it feels utterly out of place in the ancient world. The genius of the Geographia lay in its revolutionary structure. Ptolemy introduced the concept of a coordinate system, overlaying the globe with a grid of latitude and longitude lines. This was a quantum leap beyond the simple, narrative descriptions of earlier geographers like Herodotus. He provided explicit instructions on how to project this spherical grid onto a flat sheet of parchment using 2 sophisticated map projections, one curved and one conic. This mathematical rigor allowed for a theoretically consistent way to plot any location on Earth. Yet, the real mystery is not his method, but his data. Ptolemy was remarkably open about his sources. He credited much of his work to an earlier geographer named Marinus of Tyre, whose own writings have been completely lost to history. But the accuracy of some of his coordinates is what continues to baffle scholars. For instance, his positioning of Sri Lanka, which he called Taprobane, and the Malay Peninsula is startlingly precise for a man who almost certainly never traveled there himself. How did he, or more likely Marinus before him, acquire such specific longitudinal data for places thousands of miles away, when the technology to accurately measure longitude, a problem that would stump navigators until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century, simply did not exist? Of course, Ptolemy's map was far from perfect, and its errors are just as telling as its accuracies. His most famous mistake was his drastic underestimation of the Earth's circumference, which led him to massively overextend the Asian continent and shrink the Indian Ocean. This particular error, ironically, would later play a pivotal role in world history. When Christopher Columbus studied Ptolemaic maps over a millennium later, he became convinced that sailing west across this supposedly shrunken ocean would be a feasible route to Asia. Without Ptolemy's miscalculation, Columbus might never have secured the funding for his voyage, and the entire timeline of European exploration could have been dramatically different. This duality is the essence of the Ptolemaic enigma. His work is a fascinating mixture of brilliant mathematical theory, surprisingly accurate local knowledge, and colossal continent-scale errors. Scholars today see his work not as a singular achievement, but as the pinnacle of a long-lost tradition of ancient geography, a compilation of knowledge that had been accumulating for centuries in the great library of Alexandria, much of which was later destroyed and forgotten. The enduring legacy of Ptolemy's map is a testament to its power. After the fall of Rome, his work was largely lost to the West but preserved and refined by Islamic scholars in Baghdad and elsewhere. When it was translated back into Latin in the early 15th century, it ignited the European imagination, providing the first truly scientific framework for the age of discovery. Explorers like Henry the Navigator and Da Gama pored over its charts, using them as a baseline against which to compare their own new findings. They quickly discovered its flaws, but they never abandoned its fundamental grid system. This leaves us with a profound question. If Ptolemy's work, with all its verifiable mistakes, was still the most accurate world map for over 1,000 years, what does that say about the state of knowledge in the ancient world? And more importantly, what incredible sources did he and Marinus of Tyre have access to that allowed them to achieve a level of precision that would not be surpassed for centuries? Ptolemy's map is not an anomaly in itself. It is a magnificent, flawed, and powerful relic that hints at an even deeper layer of lost ancient science, forcing us to look further back still, to maps that predate even his monumental efforts. While the work of Ptolemy represents a high point of classical scientific cartography, to find the true, ancient roots of mapmaking we must venture even further back in time, to a world of clay tablets and cuneiform script. In the late 19th century, amid the sun-baked ruins of Sippar in what is now Iraq, archaeologists unearthed a small, unassuming clay tablet that would forever change our understanding of ancient worldviews. Dated to the 6th century BCE, this artifact, now known as the Babylonian World Map or the Imago Mundi, is the oldest known attempt in human history to depict the entire world in a single, symbolic image. At first glance, it seems utterly primitive, a childlike sketch. The world is shown as a flat, circular disk floating in a vast, encircling ocean, which the Babylonians called the Bitter River. Two concentric circles within this disk create a kind of bullseye, with the great city of Babylon proudly positioned at the very center. Radiating out from this central hub are various triangular shapes and strange, seemingly random annotations, representing distant and often mythical regions. This map was never intended for navigation. No Babylonian merchant would have unfurled this clay tablet to plot a course to Assyria. Its purpose was profoundly cosmological and political. It was a diagram of the universe as the Babylonians understood it, a powerful piece of ideological propaganda designed to reinforce their own place in the cosmic order. By placing their capital at the absolute center of creation, surrounded by a chaotic and mysterious outer world, they were making a definitive statement about their empire's power and divinity. The annotations on these outer regions are a fascinating mix of the real and the mythological. We can identify actual neighboring states and rivals like Assyria and Urartu, but they share space with fantastical descriptions of places like the land of the winged birds or the place where the sun is not seen, realms that clearly belong to legend rather than geography. This was a map of the mind, a conceptual tool for understanding the relationship between the ordered, civilized world of Babylon and the terrifying, unknown chaos that lay beyond its borders. Yet, for all its heavy symbolism, the map contains a kernel of startlingly practical, empirical knowledge that cannot be easily dismissed. The relative positions of the places that are identifiable: Assyria to the north, Elam to the east, the marshes of southern Mesopotamia to the south, are not randomly scattered. They are arranged in a roughly accurate spatial relationship to each other and to the central point of Babylon. This suggests that beneath the mythological veneer lay a foundation of real, accumulated geographical data, likely gathered from the reports of soldiers, diplomats and traders who traveled the empire's extensive road network. The Babylonians were renowned astronomers and meticulous record keepers. They clearly possessed a practical understanding of the layout of their immediate world, even if they chose to represent that world through a spiritual and political lens. The Bitter River itself, while mythical in its encompassing nature, is a powerful metaphor drawn from their real environment, a reference to the salty, undrinkable waters of the Persian Gulf that marked the southern edge of their known world. This duality makes the Babylonian map so profoundly important. It stands as a beautiful and early example of the eternal human struggle to reconcile observed reality with belief systems. The archaeologist and historian Wayne Horowitz, who has conducted extensive studies on the tablet, emphasizes that we must view it not as a failed attempt at a scientific map, but as a brilliant success as a cultural and cosmological document. It tells us more about how the Babylonians thought than where they went, and its influence rippled far beyond the banks of the Euphrates. The core concept of a circular, ocean-bound world with a central cultural hub was eagerly adopted and adapted by the early Greeks. The world maps of thinkers like Anaximander and Hecataeus of Miletus, drawn centuries later, are clear intellectual descendants of this Babylonian model, demonstrating a direct continuity of ideas that shaped the Western geographical tradition for generations. So what are we to make of this ancient, cracked piece of clay? It is a reminder that the drive to map our world is as old as civilization itself, born not just from practical need but from a deep, innate desire to find our place in the cosmos. It asks us to consider the possibility that even the most symbolic ancient artifacts might contain encoded fragments of real, hard-won knowledge, glimpses of a practical geography that existed alongside prevailing myth. If a map from 600 years before the Common Era could so effectively blend the real and the conceptual, what other sophisticated understandings of the world might have been lost, only to be rediscovered millennia later in the vaults of a Turkish palace or the library of a French mathematician? The Babylonian world map is a humble beginning, a single, whispered line in a much longer and more mysterious conversation about our planet's forgotten past. Now we arrive at a true masterpiece of medieval science, a project so grand it could only have been commissioned by one of the most enlightened rulers of his age. In the bustling, multicultural court of King Roger II of Sicily, a brilliant scholar from Muslim Spain named Muhammad al-Idrisi spent 15 years on a single, monumental task to create the most accurate representation of the entire known world. The year was 1154 when he finally presented his life's work, a massive planisphere engraved on a solid silver disc weighing over 300 pounds, accompanied by a detailed book of commentary called The Recreation for Him Who Longs to Traverse the Lands. Together, they formed the Tabula Rogeriana, a map that would stand for centuries as the most advanced and detailed geographical document in both Europe and the Islamic world. What makes this achievement so extraordinary is its foundation. Al-Idrisi did not work from dogma or guesswork. He synthesized the entire corpus of available knowledge. He pored over the works of Greek giants like Ptolemy, integrated the latest Roman and Byzantine geographical texts, and incorporated the cutting-edge astronomical and mathematical discoveries from the Islamic Golden Age. His map was a bridge between eras and cultures, a testament to what could be achieved when a curious mind is given the resources to compile, compare, and verify everything that is known. Al-Idrisi's methodology was, for its time, remarkably empirical and systematic. King Roger, a Norman Christian ruler who spoke Arabic and admired Islamic learning, provided him with a unique resource, a team of researchers and draftsmen, and an open invitation to interview the travelers and merchants who passed through Sicily's ports, a major crossroads of the Mediterranean. Al-Idrisi and his team conducted what we would now call field research, systematically debriefing these visitors about the routes they had taken, the distances between cities, the features of the coastlines, and the customs of the people they encountered. He would cross-reference these first-hand accounts against the classical texts in the royal library, checking for inconsistencies and corroborating details. This painstaking process of comparing ancient authority with contemporary eyewitness testimony was a revolutionary approach to cartography. Yet, for all this rigor, the map contains details that defy explanation. His depiction of the sources of the Nile, for instance, showing the great river originating from two lakes near the equator, is unnervingly close to the actual sources of Lake Victoria and Lake Albert, which would not be confirmed by European explorers for another 700 years. Similarly, his rendering of the Indian Ocean and the shape of Southeast Asia displays a precision that seems to stem from sources far beyond the reach of any 12th century Mediterranean traveler. The structure of the map itself was a work of genius. Al-Idrisi divided the spherical Earth into 70 individual sectional maps, organized into 7 distinct climatic zones, from the torrid equator to the frigid north. This was a direct nod to the Greek concept of climata, but applied with a new level of detail and consistency. Each zone was further subdivided into 10 longitudinal sections, creating a grid that brought a mathematical order to the world. When these 70 sheets were combined, they formed the complete rectangular world map. This system allowed for an incredible density of information. The map is peppered with over 1,000 locations, from major cities to small towns, and it accurately charts mountain ranges, river systems, and most impressively, a web of trade routes that crisscrossed Europe, Africa, and Asia. It shows the trans-Saharan caravan routes connecting North Africa to the empires of West Africa, and the Silk Road pathways stretching deep into Central Asia. Many of these routes were not formally discovered or documented by European explorers until centuries later, raising the persistent question, where did Al-Idrisi get this information? Was it from Arab traders who had ventured into the African interior? Or from Silk Road merchants who shared their knowledge in the bazaars of Cairo or Palermo? Or could he have had access to far older, now vanished maps from the libraries of Alexandria or Baghdad that contained this accumulated geographical wisdom? The legacy and the lingering mystery of the Tabula Rogeriana are two sides of the same coin. For 3 centuries, it was the go-to reference for geographers. Its influence was immense, copied and circulated throughout the Islamic world, and in its Latin translations, serving as a crucial source for European explorers during the early Renaissance. It was a beacon of rational inquiry in an age often unfairly labeled as dark and ignorant, and yet the original silver disc is gone, almost certainly melted down for bullion during a time of war or political upheaval. We know it only through later paper copies and Al-Idrisi's own book. The complete set of his sources, those lost ancient texts, the detailed interviews with nameless travelers, vanished with it. This magnificent map, therefore, stands as a powerful symbol of intercultural exchange and the fragile nature of knowledge itself. It shows us what is possible when civilizations collaborate rather than clash, when a Christian king empowers a Muslim scholar to create a work for all humanity. But it also teases us with the gaps in its own story, hinting at a depth of ancient geographical understanding that we can only partially reconstruct. It is a bridge between the classical world and the Renaissance, and a reminder that some of history's greatest achievements are built upon foundations that time has since hidden from view. And now we come to a map that is perhaps the most controversial of them all, a document that sits at the very heart of a historical firestorm, accused of being one of the most brilliant forgeries of the 20th century, or perhaps the most important historical discovery. This is the saga of the Vineland Map. Its story begins not in the dusty archives of a European library, but in the buzzing, optimistic world of the 1950s. A distinguished American antiquarian bookseller named Lawrence Whitten acquired a curious volume from a private source in Europe. Bound within an otherwise unremarkable medieval manuscript, he found a map that would send shockwaves through the academic world. Drawn on what appeared to be old parchment, the map depicted Europe, Africa, and Asia in a style typical of the 15th century. But it was the left-hand side of the map that made historians gasp. There, in the vast Atlantic Ocean, were two large islands labeled Islander and Vinelander, Insula Iceland and the island of Vinland. Below them, a Latin inscription made a claim so explosive it seemed to rewrite history. It described how Leif Erikson and his fellow Norsemen had discovered this new land in the far west. If this map was genuine, created around the 1440s, it was the earliest known cartographic representation of any part of the Americas, drawn a full 50 years before Christopher Columbus set sail. The initial excitement was electric. Here was potential proof, not just from sagas and archaeology, but from a period map that Europeans had knowledge of the New World long before Columbus. The map was purchased by a wealthy benefactor and donated to Yale University in 1965, where it was announced to the world with tremendous fanfare. But almost immediately, the doubts began to surface. The map's provenance was murky, its chain of ownership before Whitten was unclear, and its style seemed just a little bit off to some experts. Thus began a decades-long scientific and historical detective story, a battle between those who believed it was a priceless relic and those who were convinced it was an elaborate modern hoax. The debate has hinged almost entirely on forensic science, turning the map into a testing ground for the latest analytical technologies. In 1972, researchers at Yale and the University of California used a then-new technique called electron microprobe analysis to study the ink. They discovered trace amounts of a titanium compound called anatase, a synthetic pigment they argued was not available until the 1920s. The case seemed closed, the map was a forgery. But the story refused to die. Decades later, new and more sophisticated analysis techniques reopened the investigation. In the late 1990s, researchers at the University of California, Davis, used a particle accelerator to perform a more sensitive test. They argued that the amount of anatase was actually minuscule and could be explained by natural contamination from the sand used to blot the ink, or could even be a natural component of the iron gall ink recipe used in the Middle Ages. Then, radiocarbon dating of the parchment itself delivered another stunning twist. Tests conducted in 2002 dated the sheepskin vellum to between 1423 and 1445, placing it squarely in the correct historical period for the map to be genuine. This finding was a massive point in the map's favor. A forger would have had to find a blank piece of authentic 15th century parchment to draw on. Yet the ink controversy persisted. A 2021 study, using even more advanced spectroscopic imaging, once again pointed to the presence of titanium throughout the ink line, strongly suggesting a 20th century origin. The scientific evidence has swung back and forth like a pendulum for over half a century, with each new generation of technology offering a new verdict, leaving the map in a perpetual state of limbo. Beyond the science, however, lies a more intriguing historical argument made by some scholars. They posit that even if the Vineland Map itself is a modern creation, it might not be a pure invention. It could instead be a clever, fraudulent copy of a genuine, now lost medieval map. The map's depiction of Greenland as an island, for instance, is a fact not confirmed until the 20th century, but one the Norse settlers might have deduced. More compellingly, the outline of the landmass labeled Vineland shows a striking correlation with the actual coast of Newfoundland, where the Norse archaeological site of Elance Ox Meadows was discovered in 1960, proving the Viking sagas were true. A forger in the 1950s would not have had this precise geographical knowledge. This leads to a fascinating possibility that the forger had access to ancient Norse sailing charts or descriptions that have since disappeared, perhaps from the same oral traditions that gave us the saga of the Greenlanders and the saga of Eric the Red. In this scenario, the map is a fraud, but the information it contains might be authentically ancient, a ghost of a lost cartography that once recorded the first European footsteps in North America. The intense, often acrimonious debate over the Vineland map reveals something profound that goes far beyond ink and parchment. It speaks to our deep desire to touch the past, to find a tangible object that confirms our historical narratives and settles long-standing mysteries. We want it to be real because it would be the ultimate smoking gun, a single document that silences all doubt about pre-Columbian transatlantic contact. Yet, its disputed status also highlights the immense difficulty of interpreting history, where even our most advanced scientific tools can deliver ambiguous answers. The map forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about authenticity, belief, and the very nature of evidence itself. Is something true because it aligns with other facts we accept, or does it require its own unassailable proof? The Vineland map, locked in its vault at Yale, remains an enigma, a tantalizing maybe, a question mark etched in disputed ink on ancient skin, reminding us that some of history's greatest secrets are the most fiercely guarded. While the Vineland map debate raged over a single landmass, another contemporary chart offers no such ambiguity about its authenticity, only profound questions about the sources of its stunningly detailed knowledge. Enter the Cantino planisphere of 1502, a map born from international intrigue and a testament to the cutthroat world of 15th century espionage. This magnificent chart gets its name not from its creator, but from its smuggler, a shadowy Italian agent named Alberto Cantino. He was working for Ercole d'Este, the Duke of Ferrara, who was desperate to get his hands on the most valuable intellectual property of the age, Portuguese sailing secrets. Portugal, under King Manuel I, guarded its naval discoveries with a paranoid intensity, treating them as state secrets that could make or break their burgeoning empire. Cantino, operating undercover in Lisbon, somehow managed to bribe or persuade a royal cartographer to make him a copy of the very latest and most secret world map, which he then smuggled out of the country and into Italy. The map he delivered is a breathtaking snapshot of the world at a pivotal moment, a stolen glimpse into what one nation knew about the globe that others could only dream of. What makes the Cantino planisphere so extraordinary is its razor-sharp accuracy in depicting the fruits of Portugal's most recent expeditions. It shows Vasco da Gama's revolutionary route to India around the Cape of Good Hope with precise detail, charting the African coastline with a clarity that must have stunned the Duke of Ferrara. It includes the recently discovered land of Brazil, which Portuguese explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral had stumbled upon just 2 years earlier in 1500. The map doesn't just show these places, it presents them with a confident, almost modern-looking accuracy, utilizing a detailed latitude scale along its left side and ornate wind roses to aid navigation. This was not a theoretical exercise, it was a practical, working document based on the actual logs and celestial observations of the greatest explorers of the era. It was, in effect, a stolen report on the state of the known world, and it provided any rival power that possessed it with an incalculable strategic advantage. Yet, even with its basis in hard-won exploration data, the Cantino planisphere contains mysteries that push beyond the limits of what the Portuguese should have known. Its depiction of the Caribbean and the northern coast of South America is eerily precise, showing a familiarity with the contours of the land that seems to predate any official European voyages to those specific areas. The shape of the Gulf of Guinea in Africa is rendered with a near-perfect curvature, a detail that would have been incredibly difficult to calculate and plot with the navigational tools of the time. This level of detail has led cartographic historians to a compelling theory that the Portuguese royal archives, the Casa da India, contained more than just the logs of their own sailors. Many experts believe they were also diligently copying and compiling information from much older, perhaps even pre-Christian, source maps that had found their way to Lisbon through trade or conquest. These could have included Arabic portolan charts from the height of the Islamic Golden Age, or even lost maps inherited from the Knights Templar, an order with deep nautical connections that had been suppressed but whose vast archives may have been absorbed by other powers. The Cantino planisphere, therefore, might be a palimpsest, a document that, while reflecting the latest voyages, is also quietly layered over a much older geographical foundation, a ghost in the machine of Renaissance cartography. The impact of this single, smuggled map was immediate and geopolitical dynamite. It arrived in Europe at the very moment Spain and Portugal were finalizing their division of the entire unexplored world through the Treaty of Tordesillas. This papal brokered agreement drew a north-south line of demarcation down the Atlantic, granting everything to the east to Portugal and everything to the west to Spain. The Cantino planisphere provided the first truly accurate visual evidence of where these new lands actually lay in relation to that arbitrary line. It showed that Brazil bulged significantly east of the line, meaning it legally belonged to Portugal, a fact that would shape the entire future of South America. For other European powers like France and England, seeing this map or copies of it would have been a terrifying wake-up call. It revealed just how far ahead the Iberian nations were in the race for global empire, igniting a desperate scramble to catch up and find their own routes to the wealth of the Indies. The map didn't just depict the world, it actively helped to create the modern world of competing nation-states and colonial empires. This incredible artifact forces us to confront a humbling reality about history. So much knowledge has been lost, suppressed, or simply forgotten. The Cantino planisphere is a powerful reminder that the official record of exploration is often just the tip of the iceberg. For every voyage that was publicly celebrated and recorded, how many others were kept secret to maintain a commercial or military advantage? How many maps drawn by unknown sailors from forgotten civilizations were consulted in royal chambers and then locked away, only to be lost in fires, wars, or simply the slow decay of time? This magnificent stolen map is a tangible link to one such secret archive, a silent witness to the vast oceans of data that have vanished from history, leaving behind only these tantalizing fragments that hint at a far deeper and more complex story of human discovery than we will ever fully know. Just a few years after the Cantino planisphere was smuggled out of Portugal, in a small German town, a little-known cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller was working on a project that would literally put a name to the New World. In 1507, in the town of Saint-Dié in the Duchy of Lorraine, Waldseemüller and his collaborator Matthias Ringmann published a colossal world map along with a book called Cosmographiae Introductio. This wasn't just another chart, it was a revolutionary document, a synthesis of the very latest geographical ideas, and it was on this map for the very first time in history that the name America appeared, boldly labeling the southern continent across the Atlantic. The choice of name was a direct tribute to the Florentine explorer and merchant Amerigo Vespucci, whose published accounts of his voyages to the New World had convinced Waldseemüller and Ringman that these lands were not the outer reaches of Asia, as Columbus had insisted until his dying day, but an entirely separate continental mass. In their book, they famously wrote, "I see no reason why anyone should justly object to calling this part after Americus, who discovered it and who is a man of intelligence, and so name it America." The geographical insight behind this naming was in itself a monumental leap in understanding. Waldseemüller's map depicts South America as a distinct landmass, clearly separated from Asia by a vast and unknown ocean. This was a radical departure from the Columbian view and a stunningly accurate deduction. The most baffling part, this map was printed in 1507. The Spanish conquistador Vasco Núñez de Balboa would not become the first European to lay eyes on this great ocean from a peak in Panama for another 6 years, in 1513, and Ferdinand Magellan would not cross and name the Pacific for another dozen years after that. So how did a German scholar, working from a small print shop hundreds of miles from any port, correctly surmise the existence of the world's largest ocean? The answer lies in a brilliant but flawed interpretation of Vespucci's writings. Vespucci had described sailing so far south along the coast of the new land that he believed he had entered a sea of vast proportions. Waldseemüller interpreted this not as the Atlantic itself, but as evidence of a different, greater ocean on the other side of the continent. He connected these reports with the classical idea of a great sea that balanced the landmasses of the world, and he took an intellectual gamble that turned out to be precisely right. The map itself is a breathtaking fusion of the old world and the new. Waldseemüller was a scholar deeply steeped in the Ptolemaic tradition, and his map respectfully includes many of the ancient masters' errors, like the closed Indian Ocean and an overextended Asia. Yet, he boldly overlaid this classical framework with the startling new information coming from transatlantic voyages. He used a sophisticated chordiform, or heart-shaped, projection, which was a novel way to represent the spherical Earth on a flat surface, giving his map a unique and elegant aesthetic. But for all its groundbreaking accuracy in the broad strokes, the map is filled with fascinating errors in the details. Japan, which he calls Zipangri, is placed absurdly far out into this hypothetical ocean, much closer to the American coast than to Asia, reflecting the utter confusion European cartographers still had about the true immensity of the Pacific. The map is also a palimpsest of myth and reality. While it shows the real coastline of Brazil with impressive accuracy, it also includes mythical islands like Hispaniola and Taprobane in their traditional, erroneous locations, and it leaves the interior of the continents blank or filled with decorative, imaginary mountain ranges and kings seated in tents. It is a snapshot of a world in flux, where hard-won data was constantly battling against centuries of entrenched tradition and legend. The story of the Waldseemüller map takes another dramatic turn with the cartographer's own change of heart. As more voyagers returned from the New World, it became increasingly clear that Christopher Columbus, not Amerigo Vespucci, had been the first European to make landfall in the Americas. Waldseemüller, apparently stricken by this realization, and perhaps feeling he had been misled by Vespucci's sensationalized accounts, tried to undo his own monumental decision. In his later maps published in 1513 and 1516, he dropped the name America entirely, instead labeling the new land simply Terra Incognita or Terra Nova, and he gave credit back to Columbus. But it was too late. The name had already been popularized by the 1,000 copies of his original map and book that had circulated across Europe. The power of the printed word had cemented a name for the continents that would last forever, a testament to how a single map can forever shape historical perception and identity. For centuries, the original wall map was believed lost, another vanished relic of the Age of Discovery. Then, in 1901, the Jesuit historian Father Joseph Fisher made a discovery that would rock the world of cartography. He was conducting research in the library of Wulfegg Castle in southern Germany when he stumbled upon what he immediately recognized as the long-lost Waldseemüller map, perfectly preserved within a single, bound folio. Its rediscovery was a sensation, and it instantly became one of the most valuable and important maps in existence. In 2003, the German government arranged for the United States Library of Congress to acquire it for $10 million, where it now resides as the centerpiece of their collection, a powerful symbol of the map that named America. Its existence forces us to ponder the immense power of cartographers. With a single stroke of the pen, Waldseemüller and Ringman gave half the world a name that would endure for millennia, based on a deduction that was both brilliantly correct and ultimately unfair to the man who first sailed there. It reminds us that our understanding of the world is not just shaped by explorers, but by the scholars who interpret their journeys, and that the stories maps tell can become so deeply embedded in our culture that they become unchangeable facts, regardless of their original accuracy or intent. This ability of a map to forge a permanent historical narrative sets the stage for our next example, a chart that used ancient sources to predict a geographical reality that would not be confirmed for hundreds of years. Now we leap forward to the 18th century, a time often called the Age of Enlightenment, when reason and science began to systematically dismantle the superstitions of the past. Yet it is here that we encounter one of the most perplexing cartographic tales, a story that begins not with a new discovery, but with a radical reinterpretation of ancient knowledge. The central figure is Philippe Buach, the premier géographe du roi, the first geographer to the King of France. Buach was no fringe theorist. He was a respected academic, a member of the French Academy of Sciences, and a pioneer in the field of thematic cartography. In 1737, he published a world map that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. It was not a map based on the latest voyages of Captain Cook or other contemporary explorers. Instead, Buach made a stunning claim. His depiction of the southern hemisphere was based on much older sources, maps from Antiquity that he believed preserved the true geography of the world before some great cataclysm. His most controversial assertion was that the southern continent, Antarctica, was not a single landmass, but was in fact divided into two vast islands, separated by a frozen sea. To his contemporaries, this idea was nothing short of ludicrous. The concept of a great southern land was still largely theoretical, and no explorer had yet penetrated the ice packs far enough to chart the continent's true form. The prevailing wisdom was that if it existed at all, it was a single, solid landmass. Buach was widely mocked for his seemingly fanciful and unscientific proposal. What his critics failed to grasp was the foundation of his theory. Buach argued that he was working from fragments of geographical knowledge passed down from the ancient Greeks, perhaps even from the lost works of a scholar like Pythagoras. He hypothesized that this ancient civilization had possessed a sophisticated understanding of global geography, knowledge that was later lost during the Dark Ages but preserved in partial and corrupted forms within certain classical texts and maps. He believed these ancient sources described a world before the current Ice Age, a world where the coastlines and landforms were visible and chartable. His map was an attempt to reconstruct that primeval worldview, For nearly 2 centuries, Buach's map was relegated to a historical curiosity, an example of enlightened overreach. Then, in the mid-20th century, something extraordinary happened. The development of modern seismic and sonar technology finally allowed scientists to peer beneath the miles-thick ice sheet covering Antarctica. What they discovered was nothing short of revolutionary. The continent was not a single, monolithic landmass. The data revealed that a massive subglacial trench, a deep oceanic channel, indeed splits the continent in two, separating East Antarctica from West Antarctica. This channel, now known as the Bentley Subglacial Trench, effectively means that if all the ice were to miraculously vanish, we would see two very large primary landmasses divided by water. Buach's hypothetical map, drawn with ink and conjecture in 1737, had eerily predicted a geographical reality that would not be scientifically confirmed until the 1950s. Beyond this stunningly accurate broad stroke, the details on Buach's chart invite even deeper scrutiny. He depicted detailed mountain ranges in the interior of his theoretical continent, ranges that have no business being on any 18th century map. Yet, modern surveys have confirmed the existence of massive subglacial mountain chains, like the Gambatsev mountain range, which rivals the Alps in scale but remains completely hidden from view, buried under thousands of feet of ice. His map also suggests specific sea routes and channels around the continent that align with known, navigable passages that would not be safely traversed by ships for another 100 years. The question is no longer whether Buach was right about the fundamental structure of Antarctica, but how he could have possibly known it. The idea that he simply guessed correctly on so many specific details stretches credulity to the breaking point. The legacy of Buach's controversial work is a powerful testament to the enduring value of ideas that are initially dismissed. His map directly inspired the American explorer Charles Wilkes, who led a United States exploring expedition to the Antarctic region in 1838. While Wilkes's own charts were flawed, his mission was driven by the desire to confirm or deny the theories of geographers like Buach, proving that even contested maps can propel exploration forward. The story of the Buach map forces a moment of profound reflection. How many other theories, now gathering dust on the shelves of history, were dismissed not because they were wrong, but because they were simply too far ahead of their time? How many might contain a kernel of truth, a fragment of lost data waiting for our technology to finally catch up and reveal it? This remarkable document serves as a crucial bridge, connecting the speculative mysteries of ancient sources with the hard, empirical data of modern science, suggesting that the line between myth and reality might be far thinner and far more fascinating than we ever supposed. While Ptolemy's grand world map rightly commands attention for its ambitious scope, his more focused work on the northern regions holds mysteries all its own, revealing a fascinating blend of hard-won fact and enduring myth. In his separate map of northern Europe, included in his Geographia, we see a mind struggling to reconcile first-hand exploration with the tantalizing whispers of legend. On one hand, the map demonstrates a remarkable grasp of certain geographical realities. He accurately places the general shape of Scotland, correctly identifying it as a landmass separate from the rest of Britain. He also charts the Cimbrian Peninsula, what we now know as Jutland in Denmark, and provides a surprisingly recognizable outline of the Scandinavian region, which he labels Scandia. This level of knowledge about lands far beyond the comfortable warmth of the Mediterranean is, in itself, an astonishing feat for a second-century scholar based in Alexandria. Yet, interwoven with these accurate observations are elements of pure fantasy that blur the line between the known and the unknown. Most famously, Ptolemy includes the island of Thule, placing it a 6-day sail north of Britain. Thule was the ultimate terra incognita of the ancient world, a place first mentioned by the Greek explorer Pytheas of Massalia centuries earlier, described as a land where the sea became a strange, slushy mixture and the sun barely set in summer. For Ptolemy, Thule was not just a myth, it was a real place to be plotted on a grid of latitude and longitude, the farthest northern point of his ordered world. He also populates his northern seas with other speculative islands like Scandia and Dumna, reflecting the common practice of filling cartographic blank spots with places heard of in travelers' tales but never verified. This creates a captivating tension in his work, a scientific desire for accuracy constantly bumping against the limits of contemporary exploration. The source of Ptolemy's more accurate northern data is a subject of intense debate among classicists. The most compelling theory points directly to that same Pytheas of Massalia, a daring navigator from the 4th century BCE whose own written account on the ocean has been completely lost to history. Pytheas is believed to have undertaken an incredible voyage, sailing from the Mediterranean through the Pillars of Hercules and all the way up the Atlantic coast of Europe to Britain, and possibly even beyond, circling the island and venturing far enough north to witness the Arctic midnight sun. Ptolemy and his own key source Marinus of Tyre almost certainly had access to fragments of Pytheas's descriptions, which would have provided those startlingly precise details about the shape of Scotland and the existence of lands to the northeast. His map, therefore, might be our best surviving window into the discoveries of one of history's most intrepid and forgotten explorers. However, Ptolemy's northern map is also riddled with significant errors that reveal the inherent challenges of ancient cartography. He dramatically overextends the landmass of Scotland, stretching it far to the east and skewing its orientation. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a fundamental miscalculation, likely stemming from misinterpreted sailing times and distances provided by his sources. Without reliable chronometers or a way to accurately fix longitude, converting a sailor's report of a 6-day voyage into a precise spatial measurement was an exercise in fraught estimation. These inaccuracies were not trivial. They would have profound consequences, misleading navigators for centuries and creating a distorted image of the North that would prove incredibly difficult to dislodge. The legacy of this flawed yet foundational map is a story of both reverence and stagnation. Throughout the Middle Ages, Ptolemy's work was copied and recopied by scholars who held his authority as absolute. His correct insights, like the separate nature of Britain, were preserved, but so were his errors, like the misshapen Scotland and the mythical Thule, which were perpetuated unquestioningly for over 1,000 years. His maps became a cage, a prestigious template that discouraged new exploration and independent verification. It wasn't until the Age of Discovery, when navigators like Martin Frobisher and William Barents finally sailed these northern waters themselves, that they could begin to correct the record, slowly chipping away at the Ptolemaic model that had dominated for so long. This enduring puzzle of Ptolemy's northern map forces a haunting question onto the table. If his accurate placements of Scotland and Scandinavia were indeed based on the lost voyage of Pytheas, what other incredible journeys might have been undertaken by ancient mariners, only to have their records vanish into the ash heaps of history? How much detailed geographical knowledge, painstakingly gathered by forgotten explorers, was later condensed, corrupted, and embedded into the works of compilers like Ptolemy, where it sits waiting for us to recognize its true origin? Ptolemy's map of the North is a palimpsest, a layered document where the clear, confident lines of scientific inquiry are written over the faint, almost erased scribbles of genuine discovery. hinting at a much older and more adventurous world than we often credit to antiquity. Amid the intellectual stagnation often associated with Europe's so-called Dark Ages, a flicker of geographical knowledge was kept alive not in royal courts or bustling ports, but within the quiet, hallowed scriptoriums of remote monasteries. Here in the 8th century, in the small kingdom of Asturias in northern Spain, a monk named Beatus of Liébana created something extraordinary. He was composing a commentary on the Apocalypse, the Book of Revelation, a text that vividly describes the end of the world. To help his readers visualize the final journey of the apostles and the spread of the gospel to the farthest corners of the earth, he included a world map. This was not a map for navigation or political rule. It was a map for salvation, a spiritual guide meant to illustrate the divine plan for humanity within a geographical framework. The Beatus map, as it's known, is a stunning artifact that perfectly encapsulates the medieval mind, where faith and geography were inseparably intertwined, and where the preservation of ancient knowledge became an unintended, sacred duty. The map's form is immediately recognizable to scholars of the period. It is a classic TO map. The entire known world is depicted as a perfect circle, the O, which is then divided by a T shape into the 3 continents recognized by Christian tradition from the story of Noah's sons. The vertical stem of the T is the Mediterranean Sea, separating Europe on the left from Africa on the right. The horizontal bar represents both the Don River to the north and the Nile River to the south, with Asia occupying the entire top half of the circle above this watery divide. Jerusalem sits proudly at the very center of this cosmic diagram, the spiritual navel of the world. At first glance, this schematic seems purely symbolic, a theological statement with little regard for physical reality. Yet, upon closer inspection, the Beatus map reveals itself to be far more sophisticated. Scattered across this symbolic framework are the names and locations of real places, the cities of Alexandria, Rome, and Babylon, the regions of Ethiopia, India, and Persia, all plotted with a relative spatial awareness that hints at a deeper geographical understanding lurking beneath the spiritual surface. This is the central mystery of Beatus's work. How did a monk in 8th century Spain, living in a Christian kingdom under constant threat from Muslim powers to the south and largely cut off from the wider world, possess such a detailed catalogue of distant lands? Historians like David Woodward point to the map's clear debt to Roman sources. The layout and many of the place names can be traced back to the works of 4th and 5th century Roman scholars like Orosius and St. Jerome, who had access to the geographical libraries of the late Roman Empire. Beatus was likely not drawing from fresh exploration, but from copying and compiling these much older texts that had been preserved in monastic libraries. His map, and others like it, functioned as a crucial lifeboat for classical knowledge, carrying the geographical ideas of Rome and Greece through the turbulent centuries following the empire's collapse. The monasteries became unintended arks, safeguarding the seeds of science and geography that would later be replanted during the Renaissance. One of the most fascinating features of the Beatus maps is their intricate depiction of the missions of the 12 apostles, showing the routes they took to spread Christianity to the world. Beatus meticulously charts the journeys of Thomas to India, Matthew to Ethiopia, and James to Spain. While this serves a clear evangelical purpose, these pathways almost perfectly mirror the major trade routes of the ancient world. The Silk Road to the east, the incense route to the south, and the maritime networks of the Mediterranean. This is no coincidence. It suggests that the flow of people, goods, and information along these ancient highways had been so well established in Roman geographical texts that they became the natural framework for explaining the spread of faith. The map, therefore, is a palimpsest, On the surface, it is a diagram of divine providence, but just beneath lies the faded but unmistakable imprint of empirical Roman trade and travel logs, a secular geography preserved within a sacred context. The influence of Beatus's commentary and its accompanying map cannot be overstated. It was copied and recopied by monks for centuries, with over 24 illustrated manuscripts surviving to this day, each a minor variation on his original theme. These copies became a primary model for the great mappamundi of the High Middle Ages, like the famous Hereford map, which would expand on this TO model, filling the edges with even more wondrous and terrifying creatures from legend. The Beatus tradition ensured that the blend of classical geography and Christian symbolism became the dominant way of seeing the world for hundreds of years. It forces a powerful question upon us: how many other fragments of ancient science and knowledge survived not because they were valued for their own sake, but because they were accidentally baked into religious doctrine? The maps of Beatus of Lillebonne are a profound testament to the role of faith in the unexpected preservation of truth. They remind us that the light of knowledge, once kindled, can be guarded in the most unlikely of places, waiting for a future age to rediscover its original brilliance. As we move from the symbolic world of Beatus, we encounter a figure who represents one of history's most fascinating intellectual contradictions. A man whose work proves that even the most flawed framework cannot completely suppress the power of first-hand observation. In the 6th century, a Greek-Egyptian merchant and later monk known as Cosmas Indicopoulos, literally Cosmos, who sailed to India, set out to create a map of the world with a very specific and radical purpose: to use geography to prove theology. After a life of extensive travel throughout the Indian Ocean, trading as far as Sri Lanka and possibly even the shores of India, Cosmas retired to a monastery and wrote a sprawling, illustrated work titled Christian Topography. His mission was nothing less than to refute the pagan, spherical Earth model of the Greeks and replace it with a biblical, literalist view of the cosmos. The map he produced was not a circle or a sphere, but a vast, rectangular box, modeled explicitly on the description of the tabernacle in the Old Testament. The earth was a flat, oblong plane, with the heavens above forming a vaulted lid, and Jerusalem sitting at the very center of this divine creation. This was cartography not as a tool for navigation, but as an act of faith, a visual argument for a fundamentalist reading of Scripture. The profound paradox of Cosmas's work is that while his cosmological model was spectacularly wrong, his practical, ground-level geographical descriptions were often remarkably accurate and incredibly valuable. Having spent years sailing the trade routes of the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the Indian Ocean, he provided detailed and first-hand accounts of the ports, products, and peoples of these regions. He described the island of Sri Lanka, which he called Taprobane, with precise details about its size, its twin harbors, and its role as a central hub for the trade in spices, silks, and gems between China and the West. He wrote knowledgeably about the monsoon winds that powered this trade, and he documented the presence of Christian communities in India long before the Portuguese arrival. This created a stunning disconnect in his work. As historian Wanda Walska-Knuth notes, Cosmas the theologian was constructing a flat, box-like universe, while Cosmas the merchant was simultaneously providing some of the most reliable commercial intelligence of his era, information that was eagerly consumed by practical merchants and diplomats who cared little for his theological arguments about the shape of the world. Breaking down the elements of his map reveals this constant tension. The overall structure is rigidly ideological, a rectangular Earth with four great gulfs: the Caspian Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean piercing the surrounding outer ocean, which is itself bounded by high walls that support the vault of heaven. It is a closed, finite, and meticulously described universe based on a specific interpretation of biblical passages. Yet, within this bizarre framework, he places real-world locations with a surprising degree of accuracy. The relative positions of Arabia, India, and Sri Lanka are informed by his actual voyages, and his descriptions of the Silk trade routes are so precise that modern historians use them to understand the economic networks of the 6th century. His work is a perfect illustration of how a powerful ideological bias can shape the container for knowledge, but it cannot always completely distort the raw data of lived experience that is placed inside it. The reception of Cosmas's work over the centuries is a tale of two audiences. Among educated scholars in both the Byzantine and later the Latin West, his flat Earth model was largely criticized or outright ignored. Most medieval scholars continued to favor the spherical Earth model inherited from the Greeks, recognizing its explanatory power for astronomical phenomena. Yet his practical descriptions of the East never lost their value. His book was copied and preserved not for its theology but for its ethnography and economics. Centuries later, during the Age of Discovery, Portuguese explorers and traders consulted manuscripts of Christian topography for its insights into the markets and navigation of the Indian Ocean, separating the useful wheat of his observations from the chaff of his cosmological beliefs. His work became a testament to the fact that valuable truth can be found in the most unlikely of places, even buried within a system of thought that seems completely alien to modern science. This leaves us with a powerful and enduring question about the nature of knowledge itself. Cosmas Indicopoulos was a man deeply committed to a worldview that modern science has thoroughly disproven. His bias was profound and all-encompassing, yet it was not powerful enough to erase the evidence of his own eyes and ears. His personal experience as a traveler forced accurate information into a model that had no room for it, creating a document that is both a monument to human error and a priceless record of human discovery. His story forces us to ponder how many other historical documents we might have dismissed too quickly because their overall framework seems absurd, potentially missing the nuggets of hard-won truth they contain. It demonstrates that the pursuit of knowledge is rarely a clean, linear path, but is instead a messy, contradictory, and deeply human endeavor where belief and observation are in constant negotiation. Cosmas's flawed map, therefore, serves as a perfect bridge, reminding us that the quest for a purely objective, scientific view of the world required freeing cartography from such ideological constraints, a liberation we see fully realized in the work of the next great mind we will examine. While the medieval world grappled with theological maps and inherited classical errors, a brilliant mind in Central Asia was single-handedly revolutionizing the science of cartography through pure, uncompromising empirical inquiry. Meet Abu Rayhan al-Biruni, an 11th century Persian scholar whose intellectual curiosity knew no borders, both literally and figuratively. Born in the year 973 in the region of Khwarezm, in what is now Uzbekistan, al-Biruni was a true polymath and astronomer, historian, pharmacist, and physicist. But it is his work in geography that truly staggers the modern mind. At a time when many European maps were still depicting a flat Earth surrounded by biblical monsters, al-Biruni was not only confirming the planet's spherical shape but calculating its circumference with an accuracy that would not be surpassed for centuries. His method was a masterclass in practical trigonometry. While accompanying the military campaigns of Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni into the Indian subcontinent, al-Biruni found himself in the Punjabi city of Nandana. There he carefully measured the angle of elevation of a mountain peak from a flat plain. By then calculating the mountain's height and applying complex trigonometric formulas to the angle of dip from the horizon, he arrived at a figure for the Earth's curvature. His final calculation for the planet's circumference was 39,865 kilometers, a number that is within 1% of the actual modern measurement of 40,075 kilometers. This was not guesswork, it was rigorous, repeatable science. This mathematical precision formed the bedrock of his world map, a work that, sadly, has not survived in its original form but is known to us through his detailed writings, particularly his monumental work, The Determination of the Coordinates of Cities. Al-Biruni's approach to cartography was radically empirical. He dismissed reliance on ancient authority unless it could be verified by observation or calculation. To map the world, he employed a multifaceted methodology that would be familiar to any modern researcher. He conducted his own astronomical observations from different locations to fix their latitudes and longitudes with unprecedented accuracy. He tirelessly interviewed merchants, pilgrims, and diplomats, cross-referencing their travel accounts to gauge distances between cities. He even developed a novel technique for converting reported travel times into spatial measurements, accounting for the difficulty of terrain. The result was a map of Asia, particularly the Indian subcontinent where he spent much of his life, that was leagues ahead of anything produced in the West for hundreds of years. His descriptions of Indian geography, its river systems, and its cultural regions remain valuable historical sources to this day. Yet, for all his scientific rigor, Al-Biruni's map contained its own mysteries, particularly in its depiction of regions he could not personally visit or verify with trusted sources. His outlines of Africa south of the Sahara and the distant lands of China are speculative, often relying on second-hand accounts that he himself treated with caution. Historians like George Saliba, who has extensively studied Islamic science, point out that Al-Biruni's true genius was his honesty about these limitations. He clearly distinguished between what he had measured, what he had heard from reliable witnesses, and what was mere legend. This transparency makes the confident precision of his other work all the more remarkable and raises a persistent question. How did he achieve such stunning accuracy in his calculations without access to the precision instruments we take for granted? The answer lies in his profound understanding of the underlying mathematics. He didn't need a laser rangefinder because he had mastered the power of trigonometry and spherical geometry, turning the heavens themselves into his laboratory. Perhaps the most astonishing of Al-Biruni's theoretical leaps was his hypothesis about the existence of landmasses in the vast Atlantic Ocean. Based on his meticulous orbital calculations and his conviction in the symmetry of God's creation, he proposed that the Afro-Eurasian landmass must be balanced by other continents elsewhere on the globe to ensure the Earth's stable rotation. He wrote, "The existence of an inhabited world in the western quarter of the Earth is not impossible, and in fact it is necessary." This was not a vague prophecy. It was a deductive conclusion based on scientific principle, positing the Americas nearly 500 years before Columbus set sail. While he had no way to confirm this idea, its presence in his work demonstrates a mind thinking on a truly global scale, unconstrained by the geographical ignorance of his era. The influence of Al-Biruni's work, though often delayed, was profound. His methods and data were eagerly adopted and refined by later Islamic geographers, becoming a cornerstone of the cartographic tradition that would later influence European thinkers during the Renaissance. His books were translated into Latin, and his ideas quietly seeped into the intellectual bloodstream of a continent slowly awakening from its long slumber. Yet the full scope of his genius was often lost, his works scattered and forgotten in libraries after the Mongol invasions, and the gradual shift of intellectual centers. For centuries, his contributions were a ghost in the machine of geography, an uncredited source for discoveries that others would be celebrated for. His story is a powerful testament to the heartbreaking fragility of knowledge, how a lifetime of painstaking research can be nearly erased by the tides of history, war, and simple neglect. His work forces us to reflect on a humbling possibility. How many other scientific revolutions have occurred, been documented, and then lost, only to be independently rediscovered centuries later, with the original pioneers remaining forever anonymous? Al-Biruni's recovered legacy suggests that the history of science may be less a linear progression and more a cycle of discovery, amnesia, and rediscovery, a pattern that invites us to look even further back for evidence of advanced understanding in the deepest reaches of antiquity. Long before the age of paper and parchment maps, one of history's greatest storytellers painted a picture of the world with words, creating a geographical vision that would captivate and confuse scholars for 2,000 years. In the 5th century BCE, the Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, traveled extensively throughout the known world, from the shores of the Black Sea to the sands of Egypt, collecting stories, customs, and a wealth of geographical information. He wove all of this into his masterwork, The Histories, a sprawling account of the Greco-Persian Wars that also served as the most detailed description of the world ever attempted up to that time. While no physical map drawn by Herodotus has ever been found, his vivid textual descriptions were so precise and influential that generations of cartographers used them as a blueprint to reconstruct his mental map of the Earth. His vision was a fascinating, sometimes contradictory, fusion of sharp empirical observation and the fantastical myths he gleefully collected from every port and marketplace he visited. What sets Herodotus apart from pure mythmakers is his surprising commitment to verification, at least by the standards of his day. He frequently expresses skepticism about the wilder tales he hears, and he often presents multiple versions of a story, allowing the reader to decide. This critical eye is evident in his treatment of two major geographical puzzles. First, he correctly identified the Caspian Sea as an entirely landlocked body of water, a fact that contradicted the prevailing Greek belief that it was a gulf of the great outer ocean that encircled the world. This was a crucial piece of knowledge that would be forgotten by later geographers like Ptolemy, whose erroneous open-ended Caspian would mislead mapmakers for over a millennium. Even more impressively, Herodotus provided a startlingly accurate account of the sources of the Nile River. While he admitted he had not traveled there himself, he reported information from Egyptian priests and other sources that the Nile's annual flooding was caused by melting snows far to the south. This explanation, dismissed by later Greek and Roman thinkers who could not believe in snow so close to the equator, was ultimately proven correct. These flashes of precision, nestled within a text also containing tales of gold-digging ants and flying snakes, create a captivating intellectual puzzle. To understand how he achieved these moments of accuracy, we must look to his sources. Herodotus was a magpie for information, and he had unparalleled access to the intellectual treasures of the ancient world's greatest empires. Through his travels within the Persian Empire, he likely encountered the official charts and records used by the royal couriers of the King's Road, a network stretching from Sardis to Susa that required a sophisticated understanding of geography and logistics. Even more tantalizing is his time in Egypt, where he claimed to have conversed with priests at Heliopolis and Memphis who had access to temple libraries containing records stretching back centuries, if not millennia. Classicists like James Romm have argued that Herodotus's accurate geographical data, particularly about Africa and Asia, almost certainly originated in these now lost Persian and Egyptian archives. He was not inventing this knowledge, he was translating and transmitting it into Greek, often being the first to introduce these ideas to a European audience. His work, therefore, may be our best surviving window into the vast, sophisticated, and almost entirely vanished geographical understanding of the older Eastern civilizations. The core of Herodotus's worldview, as pieced together from his text, was a model that would become the standard for centuries. He described the three known continents, Europe, Asia, and Libya, Africa, as roughly symmetrical landmasses surrounded by a single, great river ocean that perpetually flowed around the edges of the world. This model was more than just geography, it was a philosophical statement about order and balance. At the very center of this world, for Herodotus, stood Greece. Yet, for all its elegant symmetry, this model contained a colossal error that would have lasting consequences. Herodotus, along with most of his contemporaries, vastly underestimated the size of the African continent. He reported a story he heard from Phoenician sailors allegedly employed by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, who claimed to have circumnavigated Africa from the Red Sea, around the Cape of Good Hope, and back through the Pillars of Hercules over the course of 3 years. While this account is now considered plausible by many historians, its implication for Herodotus was that the southern extent of Africa was not particularly large. This underestimation of the continent's true scale would profoundly influence later thinkers, contributing to the belief that sailing west to reach the Indies was a short and feasible journey. This blend of fact and fiction, of critical inquiry and uncritical reporting, is the essence of the Herodotean enigma. His work is a powerful reminder that the transmission of knowledge in the ancient world was not a clean, academic process but a living, breathing exchange along trade routes, in busy harbors, and in temple courtyards. It forces us to ask a profound question: how much accurate geographical data was conveyed and preserved not in official archives, but through oral traditions, sailors' chants, and the stories told by caravan drivers around campfires? These narratives, often dismissed as mere legend, may have contained hard-won navigational truths passed down through generations. Herodotus had the ear to listen to these stories and the pen to write them down, preserving not just the errors of his age, but also fragments of a very real and surprisingly advanced understanding of the planet. His textual map stands as a monumental crossroads, a place where the measured knowledge of Eastern empires met the speculative curiosity of the Greek mind, setting the stage for the next generation of thinkers who would attempt to transform these rich, chaotic descriptions into a precise and measurable science. Imagine a world without satellites, without global positioning systems, without even a complete picture of the continents, and yet one man, using little more than a stick, his intellect, and the sun's shadow, calculated the size of our entire planet with an accuracy that would not be surpassed for over 1,000 years. This was the staggering achievement of Eratosthenes of Cyrene, the chief librarian of the legendary Library of Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE. His experiment was a masterpiece of elegant simplicity. He had heard that in the southern city of Syene, now Aswan, the sun stood directly overhead at noon on the summer solstice, casting no shadow and even illuminating the bottom of a deep well. In Alexandria, however, a vertical stick still cast a shadow at that same moment. Eratosthenes realized that the difference in the angle of these shadows, about 7.2 degrees, or 1/50th of a circle, meant that the distance between the two cities must be 1/50th of the Earth's total circumference. He then hired a professional surveyor to measure the precise distance between Syene and Alexandria, which was calculated to be about 5,000 stadia. Multiplying this by 50, he arrived at a circumference of 250,000 stadia. Converting this ancient unit of measurement has been a subject of debate. but most scholars agree his calculation was somewhere between 39,000 and 40,000 kilometers, a figure within an astonishing 1 to 2% of the actual polar circumference of 40,008 kilometers. This was not a lucky guess. It was a rigorous application of geometry and observational science that stands as one of the most brilliant feats in the entire history of human thought. But Eratosthenes was not content with merely measuring the world. He wanted to map it. Using his newly calculated circumference as his foundational scale, he set out to create a comprehensive map of the entire known world, or oikoumene. His most revolutionary contribution was the invention of a system of lines we now take for granted, a grid of parallels and meridians. He drew a main parallel of latitude running east-west through the Mediterranean, and a main meridian of longitude running north-south through Alexandria and Rhodes, creating the first ever coordinate system for the entire planet. He then added additional lines at regular intervals, effectively creating a framework of latitude and longitude that could precisely locate any place on Earth. This was a conceptual leap of monumental proportions, transforming cartography from a practice of vague description into a potential science of mathematical precision. It provided a standardized way to represent spatial relationships, allowing for the accurate comparison of distances between far-flung locations for the very first time. Tragically, the full details of his system and his original map were lost after the decline of the classical world, and later geographers like Ptolemy would have to reinvent this wheel, often with less success. This incredible accuracy in his core methodology makes the details on his actual world map all the more perplexing to modern historians. How did Eratosthenes, sitting in his library in Egypt, manage to plot the complex coastline of Britain with a shape that is recognizably an island, or accurately place the mouth of the Ganges River on the eastern edge of India? The trading networks of the Hellenistic world were extensive, but they rarely extended to such precise cartographic detail. Scholars like the historian of science D.R. Dix have pointed out that Eratosthenes almost certainly had access to the archives of Alexander the Great's campaigns, which included detailed logs and measurements taken by surveyors like Baton and Diognetus who accompanied the army. He also would have had access to the vast repository of Phoenician and Persian sailing knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries and found its way to Alexandria, the greatest center of learning the world had ever known. His map seems to be a synthesis of this lost torrent of information, a compilation of military reports, merchant sailing directions, and perhaps even older maps from civilizations that have since faded from history. His depiction of Sri Lanka, for instance, is vastly oversized, but its placement suggests a real awareness of its existence far to the south of India, a detail that would have been mind-boggling to the average Greek of his time. One of the most practical and enduring features of his map was its division of the world into climatic zones. Drawing on ideas from Aristotle and others, Eratosthenes formalized the concept of a torrid zone around the equator that was too hot to inhabit, two frigid zones at the poles that were too cold, and two temperate zones in between that were ideally suited for human civilization. This was not just theoretical geography, it had direct implications for exploration and expansion. His map suggested that the temperate zone in the southern hemisphere must also be habitable, a concept that fueled speculation about undiscovered lands for centuries and directly influenced later explorers. Furthermore, his division provided a framework for understanding patterns of weather, agriculture, and even culture, creating a holistic view of the world where geography and human life were intimately connected. This systematic approach to classifying the world's environments was another testament to his desire to bring order and reason to the seemingly chaotic diversity of the planet. The legacy of Eratosthenes is a story of both profound influence and frustrating distortion. His work became the foundation for all subsequent Greek geography, and his calculation of the Earth's size was widely accepted by educated Romans. His greatest admirer and also his greatest distorter was Claudius Ptolemy, who worked 4 centuries later. Ptolemy built his own monumental geographical work directly upon the framework laid by Eratosthenes, adopting his system of parallels and meridians. However, in a twist of historical irony, Ptolemy rejected Eratosthenes' more accurate circumference in favor of a smaller, flawed estimate made by Posidonius. This fatal error led Ptolemy to shrink the globe, which in turn made Asia appear much closer to Europe when sailing west, a miscalculation that famously encouraged Christopher Columbus over 1,000 years later. Ptolemy also criticized some of Eratosthenes' specific placements, though modern scholarship often finds Eratosthenes' original data to have been more reliable. The work of the master was thus filtered and sometimes corrupted by his most famous successor, his brilliance dimmed by the very tradition he had started. The story of Eratosthenes forces a humbling and thrilling question into the light. If this one man, with the resources of the Library of Alexandria at his fingertips, could achieve so much, what other marvels of ancient science and geography have been completely lost to us? His map and his methods represent a peak of scientific cartography that would not be reached again until the 18th century. How much of his stunning accuracy was owed to even older sources, maps from the Phoenicians, the Persians, or the Babylonians that were housed in the library's vaults and then vanished forever in the fires that eventually consumed that great institution? Eratosthenes stands as a brilliant beacon, a reminder of a path not taken where reason and measurement were beginning to conquer the unknown corners of the map. His work suggests that the ancient world may have been on the cusp of a true scientific understanding of the planet, a trajectory that was tragically interrupted, leaving behind only fragments of its glory and challenging our modern assumptions of perpetual progress. While Eratosthenes was busy measuring the world with stunning precision, another brilliant Greek mind, working just a century later, was busy reimagining its very structure in a way that feels almost prophetic. In the 2nd century BCE, in the city of Malis in Anatolia, a philosopher named Crates embarked on a thought experiment of breathtaking audacity. He wasn't just drawing a map, he was constructing an entire globe, a physical sphere meant to model the entire Earth, and his vision for our planet was radically different from anything that had come before. Crates proposed that the known world of Europe, Asia, and Africa, what the Greeks called the oikoumene, was not the only habitable land. He theorized that the Earth's spherical surface must be balanced, and to achieve this symmetry, there must be 3 other major continents of equal size, separated from each other by vast, impassable bands of ocean, arranged at 90-degree intervals around the globe. This was a staggering leap of the imagination, a concept that, from our modern vantage point, seems to eerily prefigure the actual arrangement of the continents we know today. The logic behind Crates' model was rooted in the prevailing scientific ideas of his time, particularly those of the Pythagorean school, which argued for a spherical Earth governed by mathematical harmony and balance. Crates looked at the known world, clustered in the northern hemisphere, and reasoned that such an arrangement would make the planet top-heavy and unstable in its rotation. His solution was a masterpiece of theoretical deduction. He envisioned 2 major ocean belts crossing at right angles, one running east-west, which we would recognize as the equator, and another running north-south, prefiguring the Atlantic and Pacific. These oceanic divides created 4 distinct landmasses in the 4 quadrants of the globe. One was his own oikoumene, Directly opposite it, on the other side of the globe, was the ant-oikoumene, or the antipodes, a counter-world where everything was reversed. In the other two quadrants, he placed two other hypothetical continents, which later commentators would call the Pirioikoi and the antipodes Perioikoi. Most daringly, Crates insisted that these other continents must be inhabited, proposing a plurality of worlds long before the concept was scientifically acceptable. This idea of antipodian inhabitants was perhaps his most controversial and enduring contribution, directly challenging simpler flat Earth views. It forced a profound philosophical and theological question. If people lived on the opposite side of the globe, were they of the same stock as humanity, or a completely different race? How could they share in God's plan if they were completely cut off by an uncrossable ocean? These questions would fascinate and trouble scholars for centuries. The historian of science James Romm explains that Crates's globe was less a navigational aid and more a cosmological demonstration model, a tool for teaching complex ideas about the nature of the universe. It was a physical representation of a theory designed to illustrate the principles of balance and symmetry that the Greeks believed governed the cosmos. He likely used his understanding of wind patterns and climate zones to inform these divisions, deducing that similar temperate zones in other hemispheres would logically support life, even if he had no empirical evidence to prove it. The true mystery of Crates's work is that we know of it only through fragments and references in the writings of later authors, like the Roman geographer Strabo. His original globe and any detailed writings have been utterly lost to time, leaving us to piece together his theory from second-hand descriptions that are often critical or dismissive. This makes his influence incredibly difficult to trace, but scholars like Ptolemy would later engage with his ideas, even if only to refute them. It's highly speculative but tantalizing to consider whether whispers of Crates's theory of a balanced globe survived through the centuries, perhaps in the libraries of Alexandria or Constantinople, subtly influencing the cartographic subconscious of the medieval world. The concept of antipodes persisted in scholarly circles throughout the Middle Ages, often discussed more as a theological problem than a geographical possibility, keeping the flame of this radical idea flickering. Then, centuries later, during the ferment of the Renaissance, Crates's ghost suddenly seemed to walk the earth again. When explorers like Columbus and later Magellan began to reveal the true scale of the Americas and the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, European thinkers scrambled to fit these new discoveries into their classical worldview. The old Ptolemaic model, with its single connected landmass, was shattered. In its place, they found a new resonance in the ancient ideas of Crates of Malice. Here was a Greek philosopher who had, in a way, predicted a world of multiple continents separated by great oceans. His concept of a terra australis to balance the northern lands directly inspired cartographers like Ortelius and Mercator, who began to hypothesize a great southern continent on their maps, a direct echo of Crates's symmetrical theory. His intuitive leap, based on reason and principle rather than observation, suddenly seemed less like fantasy and more like prescient genius. This raises a deeply compelling question that lies at the heart of so many of these map mysteries. Can a brilliant intuition, a logical deduction based on imperfect information, accidentally uncover a profound truth long before the evidence exists to prove it? Was Crates of Malice simply a lucky guesser, or was he demonstrating a form of theoretical science so powerful that it could model reality based on first principles? His story suggests that the human mind, when armed with reason and a bold imagination, is capable of bridging gaps of ignorance to arrive at conclusions that only technology can later confirm. He looked at a half-empty globe and had the courage to fill in the blanks based on logic and symmetry, and in doing so, he created a vision of the world that would take nearly 2,000 years to be validated. His work represents the ultimate power of the map not as a record of what is known, but as a prophecy of what might be found, a testament to the idea that some truths about our world are not just discovered through exploration, but are waiting to be unlocked through the sheer force of thought. While the brilliant theoretical models of crates of malice were reshaping the very concept of the globe, a more practical, ground-level approach to geography was being compiled by a Roman contemporary whose work would prove to have a surprising and enduring shelf life. In the 1st century AD, a Spanish-born Roman citizen named Pomponius Mela sat down to write a concise, 3-volume survey of the known world, titled Geographia, or On Cartography. Unlike the mathematically ambitious Ptolemy or the philosophically daring Crates, Mela had a different goal: to provide a clear, accessible, and descriptive tour of the world for the educated Roman reader, a kind of elegant geographical handbook. His work is a fascinating paradox, a text that manages to be both remarkably clear-eyed in its observations of certain regions and utterly fanciful in its descriptions of others, creating a unique window into what a well-informed Roman actually believed about the shape of the planet. He begins his tour at the Pillars of Hercules, modern Gibraltar, and moves systematically around the Mediterranean, but it is when he ventures beyond this familiar sea that his account becomes most intriguing. Mela's descriptions of the Atlantic facade of Europe are where his work truly shines with unexpected accuracy. He provides a coherent and largely correct account of the coastline, moving from Hispania to Gaul and then to the British Isles. His treatment of Britain is particularly precise. He correctly identifies it as an island, describes its shape as triangular, a rough approximation that holds up, and even mentions Hibernia, Ireland, lying to its west. This was not common knowledge at the time. Many earlier writers were vague on Britain's status as an island. Even more impressive is his handling of the African coast. He describes the westward bulge of the continent and the canny Phoenician practice of sailing out of sight of land to catch favorable currents and winds, a technique that would have been part of the secret knowledge of Mediterranean mariners. He writes of the Sahara not as a blank space, but as a region inhabited by nomadic tribes and devoid of water, a starkly accurate portrayal that contrasts sharply with the more mythical depictions common in other works. This level of practical detail suggests he was tapping into a rich vein of first-hand nautical information that was circulating among traders and sailors but was rarely committed to formal texts. The source of Mela's puzzling accuracy is a question that has long fascinated historians. He himself cites older Greek authorities, but the precision of his Atlantic details points strongly to a different, more practical wellspring: the accumulated knowledge of Phoenician and Carthaginian sailors. Centuries before Mela, the Phoenicians had established trading posts down the Atlantic coast of Africa, and possibly as far north as Britain in search of tin. The Carthaginian explorer Hanno had even led a famous expedition down the West African coast. While most of the written records from these voyages are lost, their practical knowledge, the sailing times, the shape of coastlines, the locations of safe harbors would have been passed down orally and through rutters, the pilot's notebooks used by generations of sailors. Mela, living in Roman Spain, a region with a deep Phoenician history and a major hub of Atlantic trade, was in the perfect position to absorb this hard-won, non-literary geographical tradition. As the historian Dwayne Roller suggests, Mela's work may be our best reflection of this lost corpus of practical Mediterranean sailing knowledge, preserved not in grand royal archives but in the collective memory of the maritime community. Yet, for all this seemingly reliable information, Mela's world is also populated by creatures and races straight out of myth. He gives a matter-of-fact account of the Hyperboreans, a blessed people who lived in a land of perpetual sunshine beyond the north wind. He describes the monstrous one-eyed Arimaspians and the gold-guarding griffins of the far north, tales that had been circulating since the time of Herodotus. This creates a jarring but telling contrast. His map of the world has two distinct layers. The first is a fairly accurate chart of the well-traveled maritime routes, the places a Roman merchant might actually go. The second layer, filling the vast continental interiors and the distant edges of the world, is an inherited tapestry of Greek legend and folklore. This wasn't necessarily a sign of ignorance on Mela's part. It was a reflection of the limits of exploration. The interior of Africa, the forests of Germania, and the steppes of Scythia were truly unknown to him, and in the absence of facts, the old stories persisted. The enduring value of Pomponius Mela's work lies not in its innovation, but in its preservation. His writing style was concise and clear, making it an ideal textbook. While the grand, complex Geographia of Ptolemy was often too difficult to copy and circulate widely during the early Middle Ages, Mela's handy, portable summary of world geography survived. It was copied and read by monks and scholars throughout the medieval period, becoming one of the primary conduits of classical geographical ideas into the Latin West. His descriptions, a mix of the real and the fantastic, directly influenced the great medieval Mappamundi, ensuring that a vision of the world that included both the British Isles and the Hyperboreans persisted for over 1,000 years. His work is a powerful reminder that the transmission of knowledge is often messy and imperfect. It is not always the most accurate or advanced texts that survive, but rather the most useful and accessible ones. How much other ancient knowledge, perhaps even more precise than Mela's, was lost because it was written in a format too complex or specialized to be copied by a medieval scribe? How many minor works like his acted as lifeboats, carrying fragments of truth across a sea of forgetting, ensuring that even a simplified, flawed, but fundamentally sound understanding of the world's geography would never be completely extinguished? And now we come to a name that is perhaps the most significant ghost in the entire history of cartography, a foundational figure whose work shaped the world for centuries, yet whose own legacy has vanished so completely that we can only grasp at its shadow. This is the story of Marinus of Tyre, a Phoenician geographer working in the 1st century AD, whose monumental achievements are known to us only through the writings of his most famous admirer and critic, Claudius Ptolemy. In the introduction to his own Geographia, Ptolemy makes it abundantly clear that his entire project is built upon the backbone of Marinus's work. He credits Marinus as his primary source, his starting point, and the man who had undertaken the Herculean task of compiling the most complete geographical record of the ancient world. According to Ptolemy, Marinus had assembled a list of coordinates, latitudes, and longitudes for an astonishing 6,000 different locations, from the misty shores of Britain to the trading ports of Southeast Asia. This was an attempt to create a scientific, mathematical database of the entire known world, a project of staggering ambition that predated Ptolemy's own work by a generation. But the most baffling aspect of this lost masterpiece is not its scope, but its purported precision, a level of accuracy that seems to defy the technological capabilities of his era. The central, haunting question surrounding Marinus is the source of his data. How did a scholar in Tyre, a bustling Phoenician port city, acquire what Ptolemy describes as surprisingly accurate longitudinal measurements for places thousands of miles away? Determining longitude accurately was the single greatest unsolved scientific problem of navigation until the invention of the marine chronometer in the 18th century. Without it, calculating east-west position was a matter of dangerous guesswork, relying on dead reckoning and estimates of sailing speed. Yet, Ptolemy's account suggests that Marinus's work displayed a confidence in longitudinal placement that was unprecedented. This has led to a compelling and controversial theory among researchers that Marinus of Tyre was not working from scratch. Instead, he may have been the last in a long line of scholars who had access to a forgotten treasury of ancient knowledge, perhaps consulting Babylonian astronomical diaries or Egyptian temple records that contained precise geographical data compiled over millennia. The Babylonians, with their extraordinary skill in astronomy and mathematics, kept meticulous records of celestial events tied to specific locations. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that these records could have been used to calculate longitudinal differences with a degree of accuracy lost to later ages. Similarly, the ancient Egyptians, with their vast empire and extensive trade networks, could have possessed detailed maps of the Red Sea and the African coast that were stored in now-vanished library archives in Alexandria or Memphis. Some researchers have ventured even further into speculative territory, proposing that Marinus's methods might have involved techniques we no longer understand. Could he have employed a form of astrological navigation that went beyond simple star positions, using complex alignments to fix location? Or did he have access to some unknown technology, a method of calculation or measurement that was lost in the subsequent centuries of political upheaval and the decline of the classical world? While these ideas remain firmly in the realm of theory, they are fueled by the sheer inexplicable gap between what Marinus is reported to have achieved and the tools we know he had at his disposal. His work represents a peak of geographical science that suddenly appears, is documented by Ptolemy, and then vanishes, leaving behind a mystery that has tantalized historians for centuries. Despite the loss of his original work, we can piece together some of Marinus's key contributions through Ptolemy's respectful but critical engagement with them. It was Marinus who formalized the concept of drawing a straight line through the known world to serve as a prime meridian, a baseline from which all other measurements could be made. He chose this line to run through the Fortunate Islands, what we now call the Canary Islands, which were then the westernmost known landmass. This practice was so logical and effective that it was adopted by Ptolemy and persisted in cartography for over 1,000 years. Furthermore, Marinus is credited with developing and popularizing the system of dividing the world into climactic zones, a concept that organized geography by latitude and temperature rather than by political boundaries or mythological stories. He proposed a grid system of straight lines of latitude and longitude, a revolutionary step towards creating a standardized, proportional map of the world. This mathematical framework was a quantum leap beyond the descriptive, narrative maps of his predecessors, aiming to place cartography on a solid scientific footing. The tragic loss of Marinus's original work is perhaps the most poignant example of the profound fragility of historical knowledge. His entire life's work, a database that likely contained not just coordinates but the sources and methods behind them, has been completely erased. It was probably written on papyrus scrolls, vulnerable to fire, damp, and the simple neglect that follows the fall of empires. When the great library of Alexandria suffered its various destructive blows, countless such unique documents were lost forever. Marinus's work likely perished there or in some other repository that failed to weather the storms of time. We are left with only Ptolemy's summary, a second-hand account that filters Marinus's brilliance through the lens of a successor who sought to improve upon him. Ptolemy criticized Marinus for overextending the world east to west, but many modern scholars believe that in some cases, Marinus's original data may have been more accurate than Ptolemy's revisions. This loss is incalculable, Without the original, we cannot know what other marvels of precision or insight it contained. We cannot see the full picture of what the ancient world truly knew. This single, shadowy figure forces us to confront a final, staggering question as we near the end of our journey. If a mind like Marinus of Tyre could exist, and if his work could be so foundational yet so completely lost, what other intellectual giants and their world-altering discoveries have vanished from history without a trace? How many other libraries filled with the scientific and geographical achievements of antiquity were consumed by fire, lost to decay, or deliberately destroyed? The story of Marinus is the ultimate testament to the idea that our current understanding of the past is built on a tiny, fragmented archipelago of surviving evidence, surrounded by an ocean of lost knowledge. What we have recovered, the Piri Reis map, the work of Ptolemy, the theories of Crates may represent only the faintest echo of a much deeper, much more sophisticated understanding of our world that once flourished in antiquity, only to be forgotten, waiting patiently for us to rediscover it. So as we reach the end of this incredible journey across 21 impossible maps, what are we left with? We've stood in the Topkapi Palace, gazing at the Piri Reis map's ice-free Antarctica. We've marveled at Oronce Finé's heart-shaped world, revealing a southern continent centuries too early. We've traced the inexplicable accuracy of Hadji Ahmed's bearing straight and pondered the Norse whispers within the controversial Vineland Map. We've seen how the scientific grids of Ptolemy and the lost calculations of Marinus of Tyre hint at depths of ancient knowledge we can barely comprehend. From the Babylonian world disk to Buach's prophetic vision of a bifurcated Antarctica, a single, thunderous theme emerges from the silence of the centuries. These are not mere errors or lucky guesses. They are anomalies of the highest order, stubborn pieces of evidence that refuse to fit neatly into the puzzle of history as we know it. The overarching message of these documents is as profound as it is unsettling. They collectively suggest that the timeline of human exploration and scientific achievement is not the clean, linear progression we've been taught. Instead, it appears to be a story of fits and starts, of peaks and devastating valleys, of advanced knowledge won and then tragically lost. These maps stand as silent, haunting memorials to what may have been, to sophisticated seafaring cultures, global trade networks, or even a widespread prehistoric civilization whose name and memory have been utterly erased by cataclysm and time. They force us to consider the terrifying fragility of our own collective memory. How much of what we believe to be true is merely the surviving fragment of a much larger, grander story? The historian Charles Hapgood, who dedicated his life to this mystery, put it best when he wrote, "It becomes clear that the ancient voyagers traveled from pole to pole." Unbelievable as it may appear, the evidence nevertheless indicates that some ancient people explored Antarctica when its coasts were free of ice. It is clear, too, that they had an instrument of navigation for accurately determining longitudes that was far superior to anything possessed by the peoples of ancient, medieval, or modern times until the second half of the 18th century. This is not a call to discard all of established history, but rather an invitation to expand it, to approach the past not as a closed book, but as an open, living mystery, filled with clues we are only just beginning to decipher. These 21 maps are a powerful invitation to keep an open mind, to question the textbooks, and to embrace the thrilling possibility that our past is far richer, far more strange, and far more wonderful than we ever imagined. I encourage you to dive deeper into this enigma. Explore the works of researchers like Hapgood, Graham Hancock, and Rand Flem Ath. Look into the fascinating connections between these maps and the myths of lost continents like Atlantis and Mu. Let your curiosity be your guide. If this journey into the unknown has sparked something in you, If you're hungry for more mysteries hidden in plain sight, then please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. We have so many more incredible stories to share with you, and now I'd love to hear from you. After exploring all 21 of these impossible maps, which one do you find the most convincing? Which artifact sends a shiver down your spine and truly makes you believe that we are missing a colossal chapter from the human story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a conversation started. The search for our true past is a collective effort, and every new perspective brings us closer to the truth. Thank you for watching, and remember, the greatest discoveries often begin by questioning what